Hey there, it's time for the show, the Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this slightly later in the day edition of the Tatiana Show. Josh is not able to join us today, but that's okay because I'm going to talk to my friend Jason Rink, who has been involved in something, and I feel like it'll be better one-on-one. So, as people who have watched this show know, I'm not super, oh my God, I love Trump so much. I love voting. It's so important. I don't really care about those things. That being said, I do think that there has been a significant amount of election fraud. And I think that the way that this president has been treated versus other presidents, which in a way, sure, you can make the argument, hey, no president deserves any kind of respect. But this is just completely outrageous. And there's been a lot of censorship that's been coming up. And just we've seen a lot of weird things. This year has become basically every tinfoil hat wearing person's worst nightmare come to life. And this election does feel very, very thefted. So I have this friend, Jason Rink, who I've known in the libertarian space for many, many years. He does a lot of video content out there. And a few weeks ago, I ran into him when I was in DC because there was a DC march. Now, I know everybody thinks that these marches are filled with, criminals, but everybody there was very chill, very nice vibes. So we ran into each other and I found out that he's doing this movie. It's called The Steal and it's about this very topic. And so, welcome to the show, Jason. I'm so glad that you can join us and tell us all about how you got, well, no, don't tell me about how you got involved with The Steal. Tell me about what happened until now that has made you interested in politics? Like, why are you doing video? What's been your experience in the creative side of things? Tell me a little bit about you, and then we're going to dive into the juicy stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm super excited to be on. I think we've talked about it before, and this is finally the day, so I'm stoked. Yeah, I think we go back a long ways because I was involved in Ron Paul's 2007-2008 campaign when I lived back in Ohio. I live in Austin, Texas now. And, I was your typical guy who was not politically active. I was kind of just a basic conservative Republican at the time, but I didn't have a reason why. And then when Ron Paul came on the scene, and I think I saw him on like Alex Jones or something in early 2007. And, just resonated with me. And I was like, okay, what do I do now? And I started a meetup in Columbus, Ohio, because nobody had. And I had $12, which is basically what you needed to do that. And spent the next, I don't know, 6-9 months. I think that was in like April of 2007 is when I first went to a rally, met Ron Paul, was like, I'm doing this, and spent that whole next year just working for Ron Paul, trying to educate people, organize, and really it totally changed the trajectory of my life. I was working in commercial banking at the time, and I realized, started learning about the Federal Reserve, started learning about all these different things. The financial crisis happened, and I realized I wanted to continue to do work in the world of like educating people on issues of liberty and sound money and Austrian economics and all that. And so decided to leave the bank in like 2009. In the meantime, I ended up writing a book on Ron Paul's life called Ron Paul, Father of the Tea Party. You can find it out on Amazon. And ended up deciding to start getting into media production in 2009, 2010. And that might sound out of the blue, but like I'd actually gone to film school when I left high school and just never really fully pursued that path. I ended up going into commercial banking. It's a whole separate topic. But what ended up happening is I started an organization in Ohio, then got recruited to come down to Austin to start like a libertarian education organization. And while I was doing that, I ended up making a movie called Nullification, the Rightful Remedy, with Michael Bolden and Tom Woods and some other people. That was back in like 2011, 2012. We started shooting that. And that was my first film that I ever made. And so,
Wait, before you go on, what is nullification for people?
yeah,
Because I really like nullification and I don't want to get too far off the path, but really quick so they can
yeah,
get interested in seeing the
Yeah,
film.
yeah. So
What's
the
Nullification?
movie Nullification was about the idea that the 10th Amendment of the Constitution gave the states the right to push back on unconstitutional federal legislation. And so essentially, the modern marijuana movement was a nullification movement starting in, I think, 1996 in California, becoming what it is today. It's just been a series of states pushing back against federal laws until finally the federal government starts to say, we can't actually enforce these laws anymore. And hopefully the whole, marijuana war on drugs collapses eventually as a result of nullification. Well, you can apply that to all sorts of different other types of laws. And so nullification was a concept Thomas Jefferson talked about, where he said it's the rightful remedy. When you can't find a remedy from the federal government when they're taking your rights, or when they're doing something that's unconstitutional, well, you've got to take it back to the states and into your hands. So it explored the concept of federalism and some of the main issues at the time. And that was during the Obama administration. So a lot of the issues in that film might have skewed a little bit more against what was happening then. But that was my first film, and so I made that film, and then shortly thereafter went to go work at a company called Emergent Order, which is some people might be familiar with, like these Keynes versus Hayek rap videos that came out like 10 years ago or whatever. It's been a while, but you know ended up working with that company here in Austin, Texas. Learned a lot about writing, directing, producing, and we did a lot of work for different more Austrian economics, free market economic organizations. And it was actually during that time that I first got involved in like learning about crypto and Bitcoin, and understanding how that might fit into this sort of stateless currency, or be a way to secede from the fiat currencies and world currencies out there. So I have had my own production company here in Austin, Texas for really about 5 years. Been doing a lot of work for commercial companies, and do brand work and do other work for client work. But we'll do some projects on the side that are a little bit more passion oriented, where we'll fund either short narrative films or like documentaries and things like that. And so that's literally what started to happen over the last few months as I started working on this movie, The Steal. I do want to say one thing. You made a mention about Trump, and Trump, uh, Trump supporters, and what's going on with Trump. And I didn't vote for Trump in 2016. I voted for the Libertarian candidate then. I've kind of always been really, except for Ron Paul, not super into the idea of voting. Been more of an anarcho capitalist. I would say, definitely philosophically libertarian. Ron Paul's like my favorite, guy who's ever been a politician, still is. And so that's definitely where my sentiments lie. But as I started to see some things take shape over the Trump administration, and then especially with COVID and seeing the censorship, seeing the reporting, recognizing that we were seeing big tech, big media, Hollywood, academia, and corporate interests were sort of throwing their weight behind the left and throwing their weight behind the Democrat candidates, and also not allowing the truth to come out when it came to Trump and COVID, things like that. It really started to concern me, and it actually really started to move me more into Trump's camp, just because I started to see, people disagree with me on this, but I see the left empowered by big tech, big media, academia, corporate interests, that the end of that, or what they can accomplish to destroy our freedom, is a greater immediate threat than anything that the right can do without those other powers behind it, if that makes sense.
Well, honestly, it's just something that if you know history, there's been a bit of a concentrated effort to take over the media, to take over the highest institutions of education, to take over people culturally, cultural Marxism, so to speak. And I've certainly seen its impact in music. So, um, tell me a little bit about what happened with this election, because people on the left and on the right are going to have a really hard time in upcoming months because the people on the right view it one way. And God, even putting us into these little camps is kind of silly, but it does feel a little bit like that, right? So there's this one camp that's, well, no, we're like the libertarians, we're like down here. So these people are super pissed. Why would they ever believe in the elections again? They were called all these horrible things. They're putting all these efforts and basically scaring the crap out of them. And I think they were actually legitimate protesting about something that's actually there. Whereas BLM, yeah, there might be some racial issues, but that doesn't have anything to do with looting and lighting things on fire and actually being rioters. And you know what I'm saying? The whole thing was so terrifying. So, yeah, I have a friend of mine who a week ago I said, buddy, I think Trump's gonna win. He literally laughed in my face. And so then when this happened, I broached the conversation with him again and I said, hey, like I mentioned something a little bit about DC and I didn't even want to talk to him about it. He's like, well, yeah, we don't need to talk about it right now because that was just a big embarrassment. And I'm like, the embarrassment was completely not what he thinks the embarrassment was. I mean, there couldn't be a different perception of that. So, what is the purpose of this movie? And just tell me a little bit about this journey. I mean, there's so much to go on with. So I'll let you start.
Yeah. So first of all, like, even if you don't, I want to talk a little bit philosophically about the concept of voting. So, you know, I think that anybody who is more libertarian or is more towards the idea of individual sovereignty and recognizes that government at its core is like a criminal enterprise at some level, right? Number one, I think there should be a real question asked of like, okay, the United States government is essentially the largest corporation on the planet. And so with an enormous budget and the ability to print money out of thin air, and could you imagine if the CEO of Amazon was going to get elected every 4 years? Like what would happen in order to try to control that enterprise, And I think with our government, like if we can really look at it that way a little bit and be like, okay, let us recognize what's at stake when it comes to having control over the government. Like this is the control of the biggest dish outs of money. It's the control of the biggest military. It's the control over people's lives, policy. It's the ability to create your own agenda and to push it through and impact it. Like there's just so much there. And so I think on one level I've kind of always been suspect that like voting was totally legit, right? On the other hand, and that I wouldn't want to underestimate the desire for certain individuals or groups of people to want to shift that power in some way. The other thing that I noticed is that the narrative around Trump has been that he's like the next Hitler, a fascist, all of these things. And I started to recognize that if you actually believed that, then wouldn't it be moral to do anything in your power to prevent him from getting another term? Like what would be unacceptable to do to prevent Hitler from getting another term? And so I actually think that
Right. Well, that goes to that core issue of what I was talking about. People feel this almost like religious zealotry toward their viewpoint. And why wouldn't they steal? Right. Or why wouldn't they cheat on some ballots? Because they think that they're fighting Hitler,
yeah.
literally. And it's been very frustrating, by the way, seeing him categorized like that. As a person of Polish heritage, and I mean, all of us were affected by World War II, but I would hear these kind of stories, and there are a lot of similarities and parallels to that time, but I don't think that they're exactly the same way that people are viewing them.
Yeah, and listen, if he was any good as a fascist, that raid on the Capitol would have been much more effective than it was. If in fact Trump is trying to somehow overthrow the government or has had that desire, and I think a lot of libertarians and a lot of free thinking people recognize this sort of narrative battle that's been going on in the media, recognize that the media hasn't been honest with us about a lot of things. And so I want to speak to the intellect of your audience, because your audience is probably, smarter than the average audience, let's say. And so I think most of us here can agree that, like, yes, government is a criminal enterprise, and we'd prefer that there be individuals who, if anyone's going to be president or going to have positions of power, it'd be great if they were more libertarian. It'd be great if they respected, property rights. It'd be great if they respected personal liberty, the non-aggression principle, all of these things. And to the degree that we might engage in politics, get those types of people in there. However, what I started to see over this past year was that, in fact, maybe number one, I think that the Libertarian Party didn't feel they didn't make important the right issues this year, and they didn't actually field solid candidates. And by the end of the day, they actually lost ballot access. And so the Libertarian Party actually was a failure in my estimation this year. And I think you found this thing between Trump and Biden be sort of like what if we could buy ourselves more time? Or what if I could vote for Trump as a vote of self-defense, in a way, seeing that there's maybe a greater danger coming from the left? And again, I know some people would disagree with that. And, I'm not saying you should or shouldn't have voted for Trump or voted at all. I'm just saying there was something else almost like larger than this election at stake for a lot of people, I think. And so, given that context, when we entered into election night and I started to see some of the things that were happening, I started to have some real suspicions that, like, there was things true about this election that have never been true before. What people will say is that regarding election integrity issues, that there's never been any evidence of widespread voter fraud in the past. And let's just pretend that that's true, okay? And maybe it is. What I would have people recognize is that there's actually things that happened in this election that never ever happened before, due to law changes, or not even legal changes, due to the way that elections were held in many states because of COVID. And so there was a relaxing of a number of things that created a situation in which more illegal ballots could be cast. And so at the end of the day, one of the things that started to really interest me was this idea that, from the standpoint of the Constitution, when you have the states being able to make their own laws, and state legislatures and state constitutions determining the ways elections went down, I started to wonder, did states violate their own laws in order to execute their elections because of COVID or because of a number of other things? And so, rather than focusing on these sort of like weird, like fraud conspiracy concepts, or even like, somebody out of the country is like, hacking the Dominion voting machines. And I'm not saying that stuff didn't happen, but you can actually just focus on the legal nature of voting. The idea that there are state constitutions and state legislatures that make laws around how the vote is to be conducted. And if that's violated, like, it's illegal. And doesn't that matter? And those were more of the questions that started to really interest me. And as I started to dig into this, I started to become intrigued with some of the other issues. And so what ended up happening, and I'll create a space for you to interject here, but I after the election, I thought about going down to DC for the first sort of like rally, right? I just wanted to see what was up. I sort of felt like there was a Tea Party sentiment brewing, which, I remember in the aftermath of Ron Paul. And I didn't.
That's exactly why I went. I was like, I want to just go check out the scene. Maybe I can, give people some freedom stuff, because the Trumpies are kind of into freedom. They're just depending on the state to give it to them. So they just need a slight adjustment. Anyway, continue. But yeah, I understand that spirit. I was like, oh, it's going to be 65 out. I'm going.
Yeah. And like, there was something really interesting happen. To me, I'm just like interested. Populist movements interest me. They always have. And so, but I didn't make it out there. But what I ended up doing was I ended up just cutting a little video, and I ended up, I somehow Stop the Steal came across my radar on like Twitter or whatever. And I wasn't really familiar with those guys at all. And I just kind of cut a little promo from them, used some of the footage from DC, some Antifa stuff. I posted it online and I tagged Ali Alexander of Stop the Steal. And he ended up DMing me. He was like, love ya, or something like that. He really liked the video and he shared it. And so I just started a conversation and said, hey, I got a production company, would love to maybe lend you some resources to help you guys create some content. And what ended up happening is like 4 days later, me and one of my production partners, Paul, ended up going to Georgia, having dinner with him and his guys. And we just started to film with them. They just gave us access behind the security. Like we just did one shoot with them. And then that turned into 2 shoots, and that turned into like 9. And the next thing I know, we ended up being on the road with these guys for like 8 weeks and, started to really see what was happening. Like, how was it that this organization that that most people don't even know who these guys are, weren't very well funded, were able to put the kind of pressure on state houses to start getting these hearings with Giuliani, and then representatives, in Congress and senators starting to say, eventually by the time the events at the Capitol went down, there was like 180 representatives and like 12 senators who were going to stand up and object to the electors. Like, I don't think people can appreciate how incredible of a grassroots feat that was to keep bodies in the
Wait,
streets.
can you repeat that stat? How many people were going to be officially
I
standing up?
believe there was 108, it was 150 or 180 representatives in Congress that were going to object. Yes.
What? I thought it was like 7
No. And
people.
then senators, there was 12. And so it was really massive. These are the people who actually said that they were going to object if needed to. And they only needed 2, right? So they needed a senator and a representative for each state. And there was a whole lot of other things going on. But the point of the story is that I was just really, we were following the development of this. And it was really interesting to see this organization be able to mobilize tens of thousands of people, even hundreds of thousands of people in DC, and then in Phoenix, and then in Georgia. And then, so I just kept seeing this momentum and these different individuals who were out there leading the charge. And, it was an interesting coalition. You had Alex Jones, and you had Nick Fuentes, and then you had Ali Alexander, and you had like the Tea Party Patriots. And some of those people didn't like that these people were involved. They didn't want Nick Fuentes and Alex Jones anywhere near what they were doing. And yet, Stop the Steal created this really big tent around just this one concept, which was let's count every legal vote. And so that's kind of how it started. And so we just ended up traveling the country, and as this story unfolded, it started to get bigger and bigger. And then obviously the current climax of the whole thing is what happened on the 6th when we were out in DC filming, and the Capitol ended up getting breached.
Yeah, I was gonna be in DC for that, and then last minute, my friend who was gonna go with me, they canceled on me, and I ended up not going. And I'm glad I didn't go, because I know that from the time that I was there the first time, it was not really violent, although there were scary parts, definitely. But the people there were really nice. They weren't really, randomly looking for fights or whatever. But what happened on the Capitol, I mean, it just seems like, okay, the biggest question I think is, do you think that there were infiltrators in this rush? Tell me about that day for you, and walk me through it a little bit.
Yeah. So I think one thing to recognize is that, Donald Trump managed to get 12 million more votes this time than he did last time. I think that's the number, which is pretty significant given the fact that 4 years of attacks on him, attempted impeachment, COVID being laid at his feet as his fault, like the media news cycle really trying to bury the guy. And I'm not saying that Trump didn't do things that deserve to be like, again, I'm not a Trump apologist, okay? He's not a libertarian, in case anybody's confused, but like, there's really almost no explanation as to why he should have increased his vote total by that much, given what happened. And yet he did. And so then what else became evident is that there's some polls were done sort of the tail end of the last couple of weeks that said something like 45 to 47% of Republicans thought that the election was stolen from him. Like, now that's a significant number of people. We're talking about potentially 35 million people who think that happened.
And all of them are being painted with the broad brush of white supremacists. I mean, do people not understand what that actually means? Why do white people have to be afraid? Why are we talking about race again? What the hell are we doing here? And everybody's super pissed. Like, I don't think you could put that genie back in the bottle or whatever, right?
Yeah, and
I mean, that's an exorbitant amount of people.
yeah, and what we're getting at here is, and again, I know, like, listen, at thesteel.com, sign up and check it out. We're making a movie. We're making I believe, going to make the definitive film on the topic because of the access that we had. And we're going to tell the story as we see it, as what we believe went down. And what I would tell you is that it's through alternative media sites that any of the reporting was done on any of the evidence that did exist. So you've got these millions of people listening to Steve Bannon's War Room and going to OANN and going to Newsmax and going to the National Pulse, and all of these alternative sites were the only place they could get any of the information. And they're listening to it day in and day out. They're getting all of the updates. They're watching, hundreds of thousands of people watched these 11-hour hearings that were going on in Arizona online. Like, it's crazy from a standpoint of, like, that's not entertainment, but that's how hungry people were for information. And what kept happening at every turn in their perspective, like the way that you would have to put yourself in the mind of these people, is the courts refused to hear the evidence. That, even Republican judges were like shutting it down because this war was about the establishment versus Trump.
Correct. But is that true? I mean, because didn't it got shut down from the Supreme Court. You would hear different stories. What's the summary there? I mean, were the courts throwing out? Were they not? Was there a case to be made in court? What's up with all these affidavits?
Yeah. So what I think the takeaway is, now, if somebody's curious about the evidence or looking for like the easiest way to try to get familiar with what the evidence might be, what you would want to do is you would want to go check out Peter Navarro's 2 reports he put out. Peter Navarro put out a report called The Immaculate Deception, and they put out one called The Art of the Steal. You can find them online, and they're both about 32 pages long, but they have charts and data and whatever. And he did a great job of like doing an overview as to the case. And it doesn't really get into like, were there servers in Germany and like QAnon stuff and whatever. It gets into the more of the data and the facts. And I say, listen, read those and to determine what you think about that. Again, I think it's a little bit difficult in this type of a podcast to say, here's what happened, or this is, definitively there was a steal. But yes, there was thousands of affidavits. Yes, there was whistleblowers. Yes, you had numerous states where there was signature verification was abandoned, where there was poll watchers were excluded or forced out of the room, where suspicious things happened after hours, where there was a fake water main break that stopped the counts in one state at least, and then finally where you had state representatives presenting evidence and all of that sort of thing. And so, but the bottom line is those cases never went anywhere. There was never a true hearing or discovery of facts. And so what you have, and again, I'm saying this is how it looks to those who are really believing the election was stolen. And so to them, it looks like you have a government where you cannot get a redress of grievances, where you cannot say, hey, we got a problem and get a fair hearing about it. And so that is what, along with the marginalization, the name calling, the making fun of, the saying you're racist, that is what I think has created a lot of this like powder keg that was building over months and months, and what finally led a bunch of people to freaking charge the steps and say, well, if we can't get our grievances heard anywhere, we're going to go right into the Capitol and we're going to confront our representatives and senators. And I think that's exactly what happened.
Okay, so I want to talk about that, right? What else are people supposed to do? I know that everybody's like, oh my God, they attacked the Capitol. They attacked it. It was terrible. And it's like, listen, losers, people have been lighting things on fire all like for months. People have been looting, just burning things down, knocking down statues. They came in. I'm glad that they did because screw those a-holes. Whose house is that? It's our house. We own it. We do not feel heard. That is to me a perfect example of protesting. And they didn't go in there with guns ready to shoot people. They didn't go in there as terrorists. They went in there saying we want to be heard. And the irony is that apparently it prevented the actual hearing itself because then a bunch of sissy loser feckless politicians said, oh well, we can now that we saw how horrible it is. And it makes me wonder, I have to ask, do you think that that was a coincidence that this is how it turned out? Because again, some people say that it was a little bit I mean, why is it that you can't do anything in DC without get running into 7,000 cops and they do not look friendly? How are these people able to just bust them down? And these cops are like, oh, well, whatever. And now everybody's like, oh my God, there's a cop that was shot. I'm like, I don't really care. That's his job, dudes. That's literally his job. That's what they're supposed to do. Maybe sometimes they die from something. But I mean, the woman, she broke in. Maybe she shouldn't go in through the window. But when you see the video, it's not like she's busting in through the window with an axe. She's some stupid lady and she's dead now. This is not the same way. And seeing it presented during all of this like COVID stuff, I've been a news junkie, right? Doom scrolling all the time.
Right.
When I saw what happened with the thing, I couldn't even look at the internet for 2 days because of the way that it's being spun. And when I hear about domestic terrorism being applied to those kinds of people, I couldn't be more terrified. I'm literally looking at other countries. Tell me what you think about some of that because I know I just downloaded a bunch of fear into this podcast.
Yeah. Well, first of all, like one look at any of the people that were actually going into the Capitol and trying to make a comparison like Osama bin Laden or something is, a little bit of a stretch. You didn't have armed people. I don't know that there's been a single confirmation of a handgun or anything in anyone's possession who was actually there because frankly, a lot of these people, like there was a lot of security just over where Trump was. Some people had to go through Secret Service, couldn't get backpacks into places. A lot of people didn't even bring backpacks because you couldn't get them in. And so, and then the other thing I want to point out is that, Congress met like several hours later in the Capitol and they finished business. Now, look at some of the federal buildings that were taken over the summer and ask yourself if anybody could have met in those. So like the building wasn't demolished or vandalized in any strong way. In fact, a lot of what happened there was kind of pranky stuff happening, Now, I will say there's evidence of like force being used against police and against security in order to get through. Some doors, it seemed like people were being let in. Other doors, it seemed like they had to break through. It's hard to understand without seeing the timeline. Like if some of those police were like, hey, it's already overtaken, we might as well just stand back because the riot police eventually came in and started gassing people. Like that did go down a couple hours later. But what I can tell you is I was actually right at the front of the breach because I left Trump's speech like 15 minutes into it because I was helping to set up a stage that was permitted on the other side of the Capitol. And so I walked over early. That's the other thing is that the breach happened before Trump's speech was even done. They're going to try to pin this on Trump. And it's like the people that breached the Capitol weren't actually listening to his speech. He was still speaking. And so when I got to the Capitol, I actually have a little video clip when people first started coming up to the gates and then some people started jumping over the fence to get onto the Capitol lawn. And, it was just like kind of like regular angry MAGA people trying to get to the Capitol steps, is what I saw. And there was very little security out front of there, surprisingly little.
Yeah, it didn't seem like they were angry at all. It seemed like a bunch of dorks, like, "Ah," like just people kind of messing around, being, yeah, pranksters. You know what I mean? That are frustrated legitimately, but I didn't see an angry "let's come for them" kind of vibe. And on the topic of the police officers, I mean, are we morally allowed to aggress upon them because they have now violated their oath to protect the Constitution, at least from the perspective of the people that are storming the Bastille, or from the people that, take offense, right? Like, when is it become moral? Look, I'll never advocate for violence because I don't like violence. I don't even like a movie with violence. But isn't that a far more justified place to use it? I mean, if you think that this country's president is being stolen, what, to me and to a lot of people, I mean, again, anarcho capitalist here, but we live in reality, right? And our world is about to become a lot darker. What we saw this year has been nothing compared to what can potentially be inflicted upon us. So I mean, literally, like throughout history, when you look at rebellions and history, right, which is always written by the victor, certain kinds of sacrifices are meant to be made. Are we all just supposed to sit at home and keep voting? Because voting is literally completely worthless. We're all just sitting at home, getting fat and watching Netflix. I'm glad that these dudes are getting off their couches and they're going and they're doing something. I mean, they didn't kill anybody.
Well, that
Except for like one cop, but I mean, I don't know what happened in that
I saw a
situation.
tweet that kind of put some perspective on this for me a little bit too. This guy, libertarian in chief on Twitter, he was like, valid reasons to storm the Capitol, remove a tyrannical power, endless wars, Patriot Act, taxation, expanding executive power, invalid reasons to storm the Capitol. Your guy lost. Now, what's funny about that is libertarians haven't stormed the Capitol that I can recall about any of those things that are listed there. In fact, let's just be real about something. MAGA is who stormed the Capitol. So on one hand, I'm sort of like, you know, applause, like props, because I've been around libertarians and anti-government people long enough who talk about doing stuff, talk about founding father stuff and Tea Party stuff and whatever. And yet this is the closest we've seen in action, right? And so, and taking our grievances to the Capitol is the right place to do it. Now, from a strategic standpoint, I think you've overplayed your hand, because you and I both know, and a lot of people on this listening probably know. Oh, we know what government does when they have a reason to take away our liberty. They freaking freeze the target. They're going to call us domestic terrorists, and they're going to introduce, Homeland Security Act 2.0 or whatever. And that's what we're seeing right now. So I think from that standpoint, I think it was a bad idea if you understand strategically that all that's going to happen is the big boot of government's going to come down on us and make permanent some of these freedom taking things they've done to us under the pretext of trying to prevent the next Capitol riot.
So, okay, I would consider us to be more politically educated than other people. Also, like a little bit more advanced, right? I think that libertarianism and anarchy are good. But do you see from like the Trump people? I mean, are they recognizing this moment? Do you think that they're going to just go along with it? Like, what's the vibe over there?
Well, I mean, look, the one thing that I think is happening, my friends, Ali Alexander and Michael Kudre, who are the leaders of Stop the Steal, have been deplatformed off of Twitter. They've had their funding sources cut. MailChimp, boom. Like, there's a coordinated effort with these tech companies to get rid of certain people. So on one hand, we're seeing this crazy thing happen, which, I know a lot of libertarians are like, oh, free market private companies. And I just think we need to have a really interesting conversation about this, because I think we can all recognize that those private companies are doing the behest of the government right now. They're doing certain things in order to curry favor with administrations. It's not capitalism. We know that it's crony capitalism. And now these tech companies, it seems, are probably back channel discussing how to eliminate individuals from having access to everything possible. I think that's really, really troubling. And I think that, along with what else is coming down the pike, is going to backfire. And I think this is going to inflame aggression and it is not going to put us on a path of healing like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris claim they want for this country.
No, I think people are furious. And frankly, rightfully so. And I think that there's a whole new level of, oh, I better take this seriously. Like family friends that I've been asking them to use, privacy apps and stuff are actually downloading them now. I think Signal is one of the top most downloaded apps right now. So silver linings, right? Um, is it over? Is Trumpy? Is all lost? I mean, are we gonna have this horror of a presidency in front of us? Because I think I need to move. I'm actually genuinely afraid that in Poland, like we would talk about, World War II and stuff, and they said one of the first classes to be eliminated are the political dissidents and the intelligentsia, clearly us being both. Um, so are they going to take us to camp soon, because they literally have camps that they're writing up. How seriously are we supposed to take this, especially people who did go to the Capitol, right? They're full on saying, oh, some of the calls for revenge are really scary. So what do you think is going to happen? Is Trumpy over, and are we all going to the camp soon?
Yeah, well, I think that the establishment, again, Trump is a bulwark against the establishment. That's all I see him as. And I think the establishment is what is the real enemy behind the state, right? Trump could be an enemy behind the state. I'm not saying that's not true. What I am saying is that it's the same reason why they don't want Bernie Sanders involved, or early Bernie. I think Bernie's pretty much sold out at this point. But I think he was an anti-establishment guy that they had to make sure didn't get in there. And I think the real thing we got to ask ourselves is, if you got a guy like Trump with the greatest name recognition in the world, with a ton of money, who actually becomes president and can't even manage to get a second term because of how hard the establishment will come at him. And, who can we actually get in there? How can we actually get an anti-establishment candidate in there? The game, it doesn't have to be
impossible. He was our swamp monster. He was the best swamp monster that we could get. He was.
We got Kanye. We got Kanye as a possibility coming up, but we'll see. But yeah, and again, I'm not here defending Trump on all of his policies or whatever. I don't have to keep saying that. But if you.
No, you do have to keep saying it, because apparently people can't understand when you have this conversation that you're not just saying, oh, everything he does is so wonderful. And you know what I mean? Get over it. Stop being children, everybody.
He showed a chink in the armor. I think he exposed a lot of what the establishment, Republicans and Democrats, are. They want to keep the status quo. They want to keep the money flowing the lobbyists want to continue to write the legislation. They want to keep sucking money and freedom away from the people. And what we have to do is figure out a way to keep our focus on the true enemy, which is the state. So I do think you're going to see everything happen to try to prevent Trump from ever being able to do business again in the United States. You're seeing that happen right now. They're going to try to impeach him so that he can't run again in 2024. That's
crazy.
That's what the purpose of that is.
But they're literally making it into an example, and I can't believe it. This beast of a man who has been the pinnacle of success his entire life, they are burying him alive. I mean, the viciousness with which they treated Ross Ulbricht was shocking. The way that they've treated Assange is just shameless. The way that they've treated Chelsea Manning is just appalling. Snowden, I mean, they're just not even trying to hide it. And it just seems like they're trying to say, we're a scary monster and we will kill you if you mess with us, and we will destroy you openly, pure evil style. Like, I didn't really think that evil was true when I was younger. I thought, oh, evil is just like, oh, they didn't get enough love and you got to understand it from their perspective. No, I think that they're pretty bad. I mean, I don't like, God, don't make me like Trump. I have to defend this guy. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he's done on one capacity. However, I don't think he's going anywhere. I think he's going to do some sort of media platform or something. He's going to find a way to continue to get his message out. I know what I'm going to do is we're going to try to produce this film so that we can get the story out as we see it, what went down. What I think is important to recognize is that, and this is from an anarchist and libertarian perspective, if you can catch this, I think it'll really make some sense. The sacredness of the vote is sort of the foundation of most people's belief in the state as a legitimate entity. And the reason a lot of people can't conceive of this thing being completely rigged is because it shakes at the foundation of everything they believe about the state. And so I actually think that if we can put something out that gets people to understand, oh my God, this thing isn't legitimate. We don't have our voice is it's been fake for a long time, but it really was this time because they had to get rid of Trump. If I can shake the foundation in the belief in voting and in the legitimacy of government through what we do because people understand what happened, I think that's a win ultimately, because I think that's what people need. People need to recognize that we're at war for our own liberty, for our own prosperity, for our own posterity and legacy. And, we've got to take this thing seriously. And I think that a lot of libertarians aren't ready for the battle. And I'm not saying we need to get violent, but we need to be strong. We need to be firm. We need to refuse to back down, and we need to find certain red lines that we won't that we won't allow to be crossed on us. And so I think we got to find a way as libertarians to link up with the liberty-minded MAGA people and the people who still exist on the left that see some things around censorship and civil liberties that they're calling out and saying, look, this is wrong. I think we need to find a way to join together as big a group of people as we can who still recognize these truths and see if we can't find a way to fight back.
All right. Well, that's a great place to end right here. Where can people connect with you? Go to thesteel.com, everyone. Jason Rink joining us on the Tatiana Show. If you guys liked this show, please subscribe, share it with your friends. When can we expect this movie out? Are you going to do it in series? What's the distribution plan?
Well, we're not sure yet. We're in talks. We're in post-production right now. We got a few more interviews we got to get. But what is funny, I'll just tell you, we actually have a second documentary that we're doing immediately because we happened to get a interview with the Buffalo Man, the horned guy with fur that broke into the Capitol. That was like the meme.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'd interviewed him a month ago, and then we ended up interviewing him after he got into the Capitol and before he got arrested a couple days ago. And so we actually have an entire standalone documentary on Buffalo Man that we're actually trying to rush out the door and get distribution on first. So you can also go to buffaloguymovie.com, and then you can go to thesteel.com. Those are the two projects I'm working on right now.
All
and
right.
We're going to have these out hopefully both before mid this year. So
thank you, everybody, for tuning into the show today. Make sure you share this with your family and friends. Check out Proof of Love, my other podcast. And thank you for listening to The Tatiana Show. Mwah. We'll see you next time.
What's the point of all this technology without a little love in our lives? Our hosts, Tatiana Morose, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and Lauren Kasovitz, have come together to bring you Proof of Love. Go to proofoflovecast.com. The Tatiana Show has been brought to you by CryptoMediaHub.com, a boutique marketing and PR agency for Bitcoin and beyond. Hey there, it's time for the show, the Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. We got a thing and and reflect and use lots of intellect with our hearts when we work together. I know that it can be so hard out there, looking all around and saying that life ain't fair. So that is why we will fight and stay up late at night, listening to the Tatiana Show. Thank you for listening to the Tatiana Show. Please follow us on Twitter at Queen Tatiana or on Facebook and Instagram at Tatiana Morose Music. More episodes can be found at thetatianashow.com, and make sure you leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends. You are listening to The Tatiana Show. This show may contain adult content, language, and humor and is intended for mature audiences. If that's not you, please stop listening. Nothing you hear on The Tatiana Show is intended as financial advice, legal advice, or really anything other than entertainment. Take everything you hear with a grain of salt. Oh, and if you're listening to us on an affiliate network, the ideas and views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of the network that you're listening on or of any sponsors or any affiliate products you may hear about on this show.